least
Yeah, you do.
you can run the meeting. But no, I haven't, I didn't see any email traffic
No.
or anything.
Okay, ready to start?
Silence your phone if you haven't.
Yep.
Just remember to. All right. Call the meeting of the planning board to order. It's 6:03 maybe. And determine a quorum. We have 4 board members present, so indeed we do have a quorum present. Item 2 is public hearings. We have none scheduled. Item 3 is approval of minutes from May 11th, 2023.
I would move that we approve them as provided.
Second it.
Motion by Steve, seconded by James. Discussion on approval of the minutes. Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. Steve?
Yes.
I'll vote yes.
Yes.
James? And Eric?
I'll vote yes, even though I wasn't present, but I've read the
Yeah.
minutes.
Yes.
That's fine. All right, the minutes are approved. Council liaison updates. Mr. Bagley's not with us at the moment, so we'll go to item 5, which is new business, and the first item is listed as workshop, the practicable difficulty language for possible incorporation to Caribou Code, Chapter 13, Section 13-140, appeals and variances, 8, variances E. The city manager, if she has insights into this topic.
Okay, so for those of you on the planning board and anyone watching at home, I'm Penny Thompson. I'm currently working as our city manager. But in case you're wondering why I'm here, I am certified in all the code certifications and building official certifications. I have not worked much with land use in the last 5.5 years since Ken has been here. I have still worked with building official things since then, but not really land use because Ken handled land use. And so that's why I'm here until we find a new code enforcement officer since Ken retired at the end of May. So you'll be stuck with me for a while. And, I mean, hopefully not a long while, but you know what I'm saying. So this was, Ken had the packet done before he left, and so he's included in here this section 13, I mean from chapter 13. And so I guess in my workings with land use, what I have in your in addition to your packet is kind of what I'd like for you to consider that is in the state statute. And I will tell you that when I did more with land use, one of the things that I found very frustrating is that we haven't always taken the time to update things in Chapter 13 when they update things in the state statute. So we do have things that are maybe not in sync with what we have. One actually came up the other day when dealing with Water Street, which is we can update our shoreline zoning ordinance that can help us with the cleanup over there. And I think that as practical adults, we all realize the city is going to have to clean up the mess on Water Street because those folks are not going to do that. So if it's going to get done, the city's going to have to do that. So what I have in your supplementary packet here is in Title 30A, in the section that deals with variances. And in statute, it is difficult to get a variance for something, and that's by design. You know, you want to have people conforming to what you have for zoning ordinances, dimensional requirements, and things like that. So it's in here several places, but where it talks, and I won't go through all of this, but where it talks about practical difficulty is actually would have to do with what we have on this chart, which is things like minimum lot size, frontage, maximum coverage, those kinds of things. And when I was listening to the planning board meeting where we were talking, where it's been discussed about practical difficulty, I don't know if it was really clear, when that would even come into play. And so it's not meant for things like uses, like that it would be incompatible with zoning. This is really just about, in my opinion, and Steve, of course, has forgotten more than I would ever know, but it's really just about dimensional standards. And because it talks about things like the changing character of a neighborhood. And I can remember when I was going to classes on this, it talked a lot about if you're in a neighborhood where everything was built in 1950 and every house on the block is 25 feet from the road, but your current zoning says you have to be 30 feet back from the road. Well, you could get a variance most likely to be 25 feet from the road because everyone else's house is 25 feet from the road. So if you're going to build, a new Craftsman that is going to be in character with everything else in the neighborhood and you want it to kind of look, orderly and neat, then your zoning board of appeals or your code enforcement officer might have some leeway for that. Or if you are able to go with dimensional standards, but maybe it's going to cover too much of the lot. Well, if you're thinking about, it's served by city water, city sewer, so it's not like you're trying to put in a septic system or something like that in the lot. Those are things that you might be able to use this for, but I guess I felt it was important for me to say that two things about this. Number one, this doesn't apply to everything in this ordinance that has to do with variances. It's really just about these dimensional standards. And number two, it's very important to keep in mind that these tests that are in place to see if you can have a variance, it has to do with the property. It doesn't have to do with, someone who's applying for it. So when it talks about undue hardship, we can't get caught up in that it's causing a person undue hardship. You really have to think about it as almost like the property is the applicant. Is it an undue hardship for the property, not necessarily looking at the person that's applying? And sometimes that's difficult because we're all human. And living in a small town, we all know each other, which is sometimes even worse because you may have sympathy for someone. But I think it's important to point out whenever you're looking at variances that you have to think about the circumstances of the property and not the person when you're trying to determine if something is undue hardship. So it's also important, and I think this is something that doesn't get done a lot either, and it's in this statute, is about if someone does get some kind of a variance, that it needs to be recorded. And as a person who was originally, when I was hired with the city, was to work in assessing, and I did assessing until 2 years ago. And I'm still an assessor, and I still do some things for the city in assessing. People don't take it seriously enough that if you have something, again, that has to do with the nature of the property and conditions of the property, you should be serious about getting that recorded in the registry of deeds. And a lot of people really skip that step. And just like when we were talking earlier about septic design, sometimes you can get by with if your septic is not malfunctioning, but you need something that's sized differently. If you have a site evaluator that can come and design a system, if you have that recorded in the registry, then time kind of stops for that plan. And if you have to replace the septic, you can take that plan and do it, even if your 2 years is up, which is, you know, kind of another weird anomaly with code things, but anyway. And then I did find also in doing my research that this was something from another town that talks about applications for appeals, and I thought this was kind of a nice application about variances and how they would address the different tests of a variance, and also that it talks right here about a practical difficulty variance is different than trying to do an undue hardship variance. And I think as we're going forward with things and trying to tighten up language on different forms that we have, I think that's important for us too going forward, that, you know, we're making sure that, you know, people realize that maybe they don't have the right form for something. And I know it had come up too at the last meeting about making sure that when we have a building permit applications, site design review applications, that we have very clear language on there too about what are your options for appeal, and giving them, you know, like we have to do that in, you know, assessing. If the Board of Assessors denies an abatement, we have to tell them how to appeal. And I think it's important, as it was stated by this board, that our forms are also saying that too. So that's what's on here. And then the last page of that is just the table that we have that has to do with dimensional requirements, just to give you an idea of like what we're talking about, so we're all kind of talking about the same thing. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. Steve, do you have any anything to add?
Well, I have an opinion.
Okay, good, let's hear it.
I've dealt with this sort of thing for, I don't know, 30-something years now, probably. A variance, a reasonable variance, typically, it's accessibility, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If a person needs to build an accessible ramp, which would extend into the setback, the municipality can say, yes, we'll give you a variance for the ramp as long as the person with the disability resides in the home. With a term, once that person moves or becomes deceased or is gone, then the ramp would need to be taken off. If you look at the second page, page number 2, the very start of the paragraph at the bottom, that starts there, but it runs over into the next page 3 at the top. And that explains the practical difficulty part of a variance. So if you have a 20-foot setback requirement from the street, the Zoning Board of Appeals would be able to grant a variance so that the structure could go to 15 feet from the street. Not a lot of difference, but there are reasons for distances. If homes are too close to the street, they're a target for carbon monoxide from vehicles, they're actually a target for vehicles. I mean, there's got to be 10 times a year you'll see on the news that a car runs into somebody's living room. The distance between structures and property lines and then the structure of the next property needs to have a space, and the intention there, it's the safety of firefighters if they need to be working that wall of a building that's on fire, and there's a collapse, they need a place to run out of. So many municipalities will set up their setbacks based on the height of the buildings. A 2-story building would need to set that much further back, another 10 feet usually, away from a sideline or a rear line. When you look at the A, B, C, D, and E's of 4B and 4C, it lists the things or the criteria for granting a variance. And it's not that the variance would comply with any one of them, but has to comply with all 5. So it's this, and this, and this, and this, and this. So when you think of it, if it's an existing home that's been there for a length of time, and somebody new comes along that wants to make a change to the home, to put an addition on the home, that's an act of theirs. They're the cause of that change. It's not something that happened through nature or because of the neighborhood, but because of their wanting to make that addition, they'd be disqualified from getting a legal variance. When I first started working in Caribou, we went back through the list of variances that had been issued, and I think we went back to, I want to say 1990. And as I read through the reasoning for the granting of those variances, none of them met the law. So when you have an ordinance that has requirements, it's like you want to stick to your ordinance. So with the reasoning for setbacks, if Caribou sticks to those reasons, it's, I hate to say it, but it's all about safety. It boils down to this, there are reasons for these things. A variance for a change of use, if that use goes against the grain of the neighborhood, it's going to cause problems with other neighbors. So I don't like even the consideration of putting this into our ordinance, that a zoning board can do that 20% adjustment if they want to feel good about things. I see it as being just the potential for more problems and dissension, maybe. I remember one housing development that I was the building inspector on in Portland, and there was a row of maybe 10 new homes, all of the same footprint and plans, and one home was 6 inches into the setback. So the other homes, these were all Cape-style houses, 24 front to back and 36 wide. And rather than consider something along this line or a variance, the city of Portland had them cut the front wall off the foundation and bring that wall back 6 inches, so it was in line with the other nine homes on that street. And it's just, it's a rule, I guess. But to have a rule that has fuzziness to it doesn't make for a good rule. If this were granted to an individual that was, a nice person in the community, and then one of those other people that wasn't a nice person in the community came and applied for a variance, and they weren't granted the same service, I'd say that's discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my 2 cents, though. I don't like the idea of, having the fuzziness in the ordinance. It's just keep it clean and it's simple and fair.
Your thoughts on the application piece, though? I mean,
Well, they can always apply, but
Sure.
how the zoning board of appeals handles the application, their job is not to supersede what the planning board or the code enforcement officer has denied. Their job is to follow the rules of the state law and our Caribou's ordinance. Which, again, we have these elements in our ordinance, not the permission for the 20% rule, but the requirements to comply with a variance. So if our zoning board of appeals follows the code, they would more than likely deny anyone requesting a variance, except for the dimensional standards for accessibility.
I would just add that, in my experience, which was mostly in shoreline zoning, most of the ones that were granted at the town level were to do with ADA compliance.
Yeah.
So, just to give you that background, most of it had to do with, they're too close to the river or the stream, but you've got to put a 4-foot ramp or porch on the house for a wheelchair. And so, most of those variants
Yeah.
were granted.
Yeah.
Because it was based on the ADA, and it wasn't causing any more undue hardship to the water body or what have you. But other ones, the only other one I remember was there was an issue where eminent domain was in place where a road had moved and it affected the properties with setbacks. And I think that one was granted also because the applicant really didn't have any choice.
The road came calling.
Right, they didn't cause it.
They didn't cause it.
Yeah, and most camp roads.
Which would be
were
no
put in
different than the
before any of
stream,
this
really,
applied.
you know, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So-
Most camp roads were built before anyone ever considered shoreline zoning or setback.
Correct.
They were camp roads to summer cottages, and they've all been converted to year-round homes, so things change, but
So
anyway.
just to give you, I mean, other than that, I don't remember other things going too far beyond that as far as
Yeah.
what everybody considered was a common sense solution, you know, with a variance, but.
Can I make a motion?
Certainly may.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we do not consider adding this into our ordinance.
Is there a second to the motion?
Can I ask a question before we continue? Penny, were you in hopes for that to be?
Yes, because I'm not for any kind of variances. I mean, they have things in the statute about it. Unless we're gonna make something more stringent than what we have in state law, like what's the point? Like, why not just keep it simple? Do we really, I mean, what do you think, Steve? I mean, this is already in the statute. If we're not gonna make something more stricter, I don't know if that's the right word, but
Probably
more
less
strict.
less strict, maybe.
Yeah.
This would be.
This would be maybe, yeah, maybe less strict than what, and I
Yeah.
don't know that we can even do that,
It's
so,
like a 5% fudge, well, a 20% fudge factor,
right.
so.
So, I'm for keeping things simple. That's what I think, because especially when things change, then if you're putting things in here, then you have to try to keep that up later. But if someone really wants to push it, it's in state statute. If they want to come and say, well, based on this statute, I think I have a case for this. I mean, wouldn't that be what they would do, Steve? I mean, absent
definitely.
anything in our
Yeah,
in our ordinance, so I don't know why it would need to be in there if it's in state statute. Just one more thing to have to maintain.
if a municipality has an ordinance, the courts will make the municipality follow their own ordinance.
Sure.
So, an appeal here can be appealed also at court. So if the applicant doesn't get what they would like, they then have the right to take it to the court.
Yeah, people have avenues
And
for
it could-
appeal.
Could be the court would find that administratively, the municipality had made a mistake, so they'll send it back to the municipality with the instructions to follow your ordinance.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Second by Eric, motion by Steve to not include variance in our local plans. Discussion. So Steve, you say you have some some history of even right in Caribou, where making exceptions, variances.
Oh, there were many, Frank, yeah.
So if you have the language in there, people will be quick to use it, and it's hard to maintain consistency from year to
Yeah.
year, from board to board.
What I
And
found.
it's hard when somebody's
It's apples and
appealing-
oranges scenarios too.
appealing
You
person.
know, that's the other
Yeah,
problem.
and what I found was, the board was not following the ordinance. They were not following these requirements
Yeah.
at all. They were granting variances because he's a nice guy, let him build his garage next
Right.
to the street.
So if they stay with the state, we'd be more limited and stricter in our exceptions to existing.
Right, and they will update that. It's not like we're trying
Yeah.
to, you know, keep that updated.
We
And-
have most of this in our ordinance, but it's this paragraph that allows that 20% discretion to the zoning board of appeals to not follow the ordinance.
Right.
So that's the part not to add into the Caribou ordinance or to recommend.
I mean, if you think about it, you'll have 3 layers of answer shopping. Code enforcement, planning board, board of appeals. And then a 4th, possibly the court.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
And the city council, they can enter into what's known as
Right.
consent agreement, letter of no contest. That, yeah, we know that this doesn't comply with our ordinance, but we don't see it as a problem. They sign off on it. And that happens too. But
Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote to not include the additional option to the variance as proposed by Steve. And I'll ask for your vote first, Steve?
No. Am I saying that right?
No, you want to vote yes.
I won't say yes to not
Not
include it.
included.
Your motion was to not include it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
your vote is
Yes,
yes.
yes.
And we'll go this way, Eric?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
James, yes, and I'll vote yes. So the motion is passed unanimously not to include the additional language. And that brings us to workshop item B, review of proposed land use table to include the comment form, the Riverfront Renaissance Committee Riverfront Development District Land Use Table Review Workshop. We have that in our packet, Penny?
I believe that Ken put that in your packet. I think it starts on page 7. So have to remember for next time to number the pages, which is what I do at council.
Excel type.
Yeah.
Yep, so we have like the use, and then there's the 6 riverfront zones. And maybe somebody can refresh my memory on why the thought was to have 6 different zones in the riverfront.
I
Steve,
cannot.
do you know that story?
I wasn't here then.
Oh. I think Dan would have been a good resource for that. I don't know if that was something that kind of originated with Riverfront. I can remember being at a meeting of the Riverfront Committee. And it was being discussed, but my thought was we should just have it, again, like I'm for keeping things, you know, fairly simple. I mean, code enforcement officers are not lawyers, and so if you make it simple enough, then, you know, you don't have to, you know, spend a lot of time with someone who's trying to get you to not follow the ordinance or interpret things different, because, you know, anything can be, you know, can be open to interpretation. And so, I don't know. So on page 11, which is the last page of this Excel spreadsheet, it looks like The C is conditional, requires planning board review and approval. P is permitted, requires the CEO review and approval. And N is not permitted. So I don't know what kind of uses, okay, we have, it's funny because when I first looked at this, I figured C was like for CEO and P was for planning board, so it was exactly opposite of
It's
what I
all been
thought.
changed.
Yeah, I guess N is still no, and I did pick up on that, but it looks like some of it, a lot of it has to do with different commercial uses that they didn't want to see back on the riverfront. And again, I'm kind of coming into this like at the, not really with a lot of information about kind of the thought that went in behind a lot of this. With the 6 zones, with, you know, having a vision for what would be going on in the riverfront to limit different things. I guess that's what I'm not exactly sure about. If someone has information, that would be great. Get me up to speed on that.
Eric, were you here through the length of the discussion on the riverfront?
Well, some of it, I don't know, it's hard to remember without having a map, I guess.
Let me see if I can find a map.
But, yeah, from what I recall, we had certain districts that, you know, proposed for like shops, walking, accessibility, that type of stuff. Some of the zone, which is prior industrial, would remain, but the theory was we wouldn't expand any more of that. You know what I mean? To allow for more recreational or commercial entities that were more in line with the beautification of the riverfront area,
Yeah.
kind of thing. That was kind of the thinking. And as far as the, you know, the actual nomenclature of it, I'm trying to remember here.
Was there, so where did the discussion come from? I mean, was it, I know that there were a lot of surveys that went out with the Riverfront Committee. Jan Murchison actually worked really, really hard on trying to connect with people to get input. So do we know, were the districts and the uses, was there input from those surveys? Is that where that came from? Do you know? Or was it just more, I'm just trying to see. if I
Well,
can find
without
them out.
having been on any of those, the Riverfront Committee myself, I think a lot of it came, yeah, it came from surveys, like people were wanting, you know, restaurants, pubs in certain areas down there. Obviously, there was a thought to not run current businesses out of there
Right,
that some people would deem inappropriate nowadays, but they're existing businesses.
right.
There was a lot of thought put into that. Some of the other things mentioned were, you know, like recreational opportunities, like, you know, I'm trying to think, like, you know, obviously like a park or, you know,
Even like walking trails or?
yeah, there was walking trails and there was, you know, other things like, you know, I'm gonna say like a go-kart track isn't
But
what was
recreation.
specifically mentioned, but stuff like that would be, because it's down by the river, you know, I'm trying to remember.
So this is what I have for a map that I could find in my email here. With, it looks like it stretches up to, like in behind where the bypass is, the new bypass, not to be confused with the old bypass. And then we have, so it looks like there's, it's hard to see the colors on the projector, but it looks like the Riverfront 1, which is right on the river. And then on the other side of the tracks would be the Riverfront 2. It's kind of a pink color. And then we have the salmon color, well, it looks salmon on mine, but it looks yellow up here. The Riverfront 4, which I'm wondering if that's more where you're talking about that had more of the industrial type things, because this would have, the dam is in that area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Of course, a lot of those are houses in there.
a lot of the discussion was more towards the north, the northern portion of the river towards Fort Fairfield,
Okay, yeah.
where
So up here.
there was more open space. And then, of course, some of the discussions were about the proposed recreational trail along the rail, which that's kind of up in the air. So, and that was, Steve might remember that was like in combination with Washburn and Fort
Yes.
Fairfield, and
I think Loring was,
yeah, and Loring was
Part of
gonna be
the
part of that too.
negotiation.
But now the state has indicated that they might want to keep the rail intact.
Yep.
So that's kind of changed that part of it.
Yeah, I actually got a letter about that. I'll
And that was a DOT meeting. So that part of it might change over time.
Yeah, let me see if I have that on here somewhere. Here we go, letters received. So this is, I mean, I guess we're kind of getting more into like staff report territory here, but we did receive, and they all came at the same time, and they all came to the city office, and one was addressed to Mr. Draper, who is the chair of the Riverfront Committee, and then Ken, and then myself. But they all said it in a different way, but it was just like you're saying. There was a meeting of the DOT and this Limestone Subdivision Rail Use Advisory Council request. They have let us know that they are not going to be moving forward with the request to form an advisory council on the rail line from Prescott to Limestone.
I think that's based on the potential development.
LDA.
occur out-
Yes.
out of
LDA
space.
development.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, granted, you know, LDA, I mean, you give up the rail line, you're really hamstringing potential projects, so
Yeah.
they're not ready to get rid of it yet, which I can understand, but as far as the, you know, the trail corridor portion of it, that would obviously have to, I remember hearing discussion that could you still maintain a trail system in the right-of-way of the railroad? That's still kind of up in the air, you know, like have a side parallel in the right-of-way, but there's safety issues and things.
Yeah, my goodness.
I really don't think the state wants to pursue that scenario if the rail's gonna stay there.
Yeah, any place there are railroad tracks, we're not supposed to be on the tracks,
Right.
you know?
So that's kind of what I remember on that. And that's just recent, that was
Oh,
in the month of May, because
Yeah.
DOT had a press release on other things, and they were talking about this particular, among other things, because there's also rail trail issues down on the mid-coast, going into Rockland and areas like that, so.
Well, I remember that, I remember Ken talking about when this request was submitted, there's other ones that have been submitted in other parts of the state
Right,
too.
and then
Just-
part of what they were talking about is passenger rail going into mid-coast. And of course, there's competing
Right.
entities on that. Some want the rail for commuter, and then some want to abandon it for trail system, so each geographical area, they've got competing, kind of like we do here, so.
I mean, even in the recreational trail world, you have people that want motorized and people that want to stick to non-motorized. I mean, it's not like there's a one size fits
Right.
all anywhere. I can tell you when I was stuck in Newark, New Jersey, I was glad there was a rail that came into Maine.
I know, I was stuck there, same thing. We went to New York City that day.
Oh, was it in April?
It was a year ago
Oh, okay.
in April.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got stranded there for 2 days.
Yeah, my daughter and I were down there. My nephew graduated from the Coast Guard, and we were in Cape May, and we flew in and out of Newark, and we had to take the Northeast Regional to Boston, and then the Downeaster to Freeport. My son-in-law picked us up.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was actually very comfortable, and it was, I thought it was fine, you know, but. You know, if you don't mind getting home, it actually took us longer to get home than we actually spent in New Jersey with our family. So yeah, and of course here where the brook,
Right.
Otter Brook, they've taken out the rail.
Right.
So I don't really know what the thought is here with
I think
keeping
the thought is they would rebuild it if there was enough potential project outlawing, they would,
build that.
they would
big
rebuild
district
it.
out, yeah.
but obviously there'd have to be some,
Significant
Right.
initiative.
right.
I wish Dan was here. I think he probably could give a lot better.
Yeah, he's got a lot better memory than all of us. I
Well,
think.
he could, because he's very active in the riverfront group too. So I
Yeah.
think he and
Yeah, none of us are on
planning
the
board
riverfront
and-
group, so
right.
we.
So it's a little bit. I think he's kind of the missing link here with talking about why there's 6 zones, and and why we want to have some things that that you want to see in some places on the river, but other things that you don't. want
Yeah,
to
well,
see on the river.
I guess I remember part of the discussion was there was like residential or like condominium type things that were gonna go all the, like, clear to the southern part of that district.
Okay, like closer to Dow Siding?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, that was, if I can remember the discussions. Because currently all that's in resource protection.
Yeah.
From the city and the state. So,
So kind of where this Riverfront 5 is, that's like resource protection? and-
yeah, 250 feet, I believe,
I
back
think
to
they
the
were,
river.
at the time when they came up with.
Which we don't have to
extended-
keep, by the way, but that's what it currently is.
Yeah, I think they were anticipating that the rail line would be gone, and that would be ingress and egress to properties along
Okay,
the southern end of the riverfront zones.
Right.
The 5 and 6 kind of zones. Because a lot of it, the topography drops right off from the farm fields above down to the river. Most of that has a pretty steep bank into it.
Are we better to revisit when?
I mean, that's my thought, you know, when you've got a little bit more,
There's also
context for some
in
of
the
them.
agenda that talks about, let's see, include comment from the Riverfront Renaissance Committee, Riverfront Development District Land Use Table Review Workshop. So I was at that workshop.
yep, so
and
was
the
I.
Comment,
So
yeah, Steve was there. So I
think
think the
Eric
comment
was
they're
too.
talking about,
I was only at one of them, I think.
I think the comment that I remember that
Oh, yeah, that was
Where's
that the-
Jermaine?
With both, yeah, okay, yeah, I was at that one, yeah.
was, I mean, it kind of came to the surface that, so we have these existing businesses in that locale.
Right,
And so we want to have some zoning to encourage its development for, like you say, recreational use or whatever. But we didn't want to deter the
Right, the existing
Right.
the
businesses.
economics of those businesses. So
Right.
we didn't want to have, well, your grandfather, which means you can't expand.
expand, right.
And that was a big concern
Mhm.
in the conversation.
Well, I brought that up today.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because you.
So if this is enacted, just to use Hogan Tire as an example, they have a pretty good sized parking lot all around the building. And on the west end of their building, if they ever wanted to build another service bay or a couple more service bays, they certainly could, according to the land use setbacks that are in place now. If this were to be incorporated into our ordinance, they would become what's known as a previously existing, non-conforming use. You can't expand a non-conformity. So if Hogan Tire, a long-time place to go to get your snow treads, they would not be able to expand if they wanted to. And when businesses aren't allowed to expand, they move to other towns.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Same thing goes for like Paul Powers Roofing. He's put a big investment into his site, added his new shop. The same scenario would apply to Paul's business. They would not be allowed to expand with this new zoning. You can't get a variance because it's an activity that they're creating. It's not, what we spoke of earlier. And I think the same thing would go Dead River. I mean, they own considerable acreage. If they wanted to do an expansion, a non-conforming, previously existing non-conforming use, which is right now propane storage tanks, they might want to build a maintenance garage or whatever. Would not be allowed.
Same as utilities down there.
Yeah.
And they can't really go anywhere.
Utilities district, the Broadway Electric Building.
Yeah.
I think the Pet Rescue's in there.
Yeah, there's that new climate storage. I mean, there's
There's
several.
things that,
Yeah,
and I think the planning board did a lot of work on this. But I came along after most of this work was done, when I came onto the planning board. And when I first heard Caribou's looking into a riverfront renaissance, and I thought, gee, that's great. Keep it a mixed-use zone, a development zone. The old industrial issues that have been there over the last, 100 years probably, they're slowly going away on their own. What we have for industry and commerce there now are good, strong industry and commerce owners. Mixed use, if somebody wanted to build a restaurant, a sporting goods shop, whatever, a concert hall location, there's all kinds of good, positive things, but we're not seeing people waiting in the wings asking, can we come to Caribou now? So it's like, if our ordinance looks like it's welcoming, people from away, they're thinking, gee, I'll go to northern Maine and do a development and start a business or whatever, and they look they look at this on our website, and they see a lot of yeses, that's encouraging. You see a lot of no's, they look elsewhere. Just, that's my 2 cents.
Understandable, Steve, but, and I'm not, those existing businesses, you use Powers. I mean, they've put a pretty significant investment, and to use the idea of a concert venue, that probably not something that they necessarily want in there.
Well, it could fit along the waterfront. I mean, an excellent location would be the old...
Across the street.
The old turntable.
Yeah.
Right.
They could actually build like a theater in the round, right into that existing,
Sure.
by the old
Yep.
engine storage. So there's a lot of good things that could take place. But to put a
Yeah.
negativity on our existing good businesses by saying you can't expand,
Yeah, that's.
I just see that as being
So how do we encourage the renaissance of the river using, what zoning tools do we have?
we don't have much.
Does the mixed use get us anywhere? Or is
Yeah,
that just?
I think, well, and again, as developers look for room to develop, and the close proximity to the river, for most, if you're standing on most of the land in this zones, you can't even see the water. I mean, all along Limestone Street, you gotta go right to the edge to be able to look down the steep bank. And there's a pathway that you can get around the old starch building. And at the utilities district, you can get to the river. Where Troy Haney's campground's gonna be, you can get to the, it's not easy. But you can, but for a lot of it, you just
Right.
don't have accessibility for water dependent sports or whatever.
So this zoning table and all of its good work, once we realize its impact on existing businesses, may not be as a good a tool as we thought.
Well, and I guess my 2 cents is, I think a lot of the impetus for what they came up with was the rail's gonna be gone.
Yeah,
And that's not a sure thing anymore.
yeah, there's like 5 layers of railroad tracks in front of the
Right.
Dead River propane
You know what I mean?
tank.
Because with that interconnected trail system, meaning for recreational trails, whatever, bikes or ATVs or whatever, but if that corridor is gonna stay there, that DOT manages, that, and that railroad right-of-way is there, you really can't really go too much further with, building concert venue or,
Yeah.
on the river,
People have talked about turning the old railroad station into a restaurant. Great idea. Good location for something like that.
Yeah.
Some of the other things, I could see canoe and kayak rental type business along the riverfront.
Yeah.
Great thing in the summer.
What is overlay zoning, Steve?
Well, it's just when you have, let's take our Caribou zoning maps,
Yeah.
and then when you put your shoreline zoning map overlay, you'd still have your Caribou, everything's still at scale, but now you can have a second zone on top of a first zone. So it might be an R1 residential zone from the city, but then shoreline zoning can overlay on top of it. Now it's all done in computers, but years ago, we used to do that with Mylars.
Oh, yeah, so it was
So you'd
literally
have
an
your-
overlay.
Yeah.
You'd have your map on put the shoreline zoning on a Mylar, then you could set it right on top of the town's other zoning.
Is that a concept that would, in a renaissance, not a shoreline zoning way, would help us?
Well,
Like,
and
for example, what I have up here, this is the wellhead protection. This is like an overlay zone. So if you're in the wellhead protection for a CUD, this is like an overlay zone. So if you're in this boundary where the city's wells are, then you have certain standards that you have to abide by in those. Like on our building permits, it will say like, are you in the shoreline zone? Are you in the wellhead protection zone? So like, for example, on this, what that would mean is that you would need to have a double wall tank for your fuel, because you don't want to have anything that could possibly contaminate these wells. So it's, I guess in my opinion, like an overlay zone is just saying that there's something there that you're trying to regulate broadly in a zone, like shoreline, like Steve's saying, like with shoreline zoning.
Or it could be up by the airport, you know?
Yeah,
Same
right,
deal.
exactly. That's
Same
another
deal.
great example. That around the airport, there are limitations on the height of things and trees and, you know, I think even lights. I think there's a lot of, that's actually an excellent example with the airport, you know. But what comes to my mind is wellhead protection, because that's something that we always check with building permits, because we want to educate people that, you know, if they have an oil tank, it needs to be a double wall tank. We also try to educate people on, even as they're building there, to make sure that, you know, that they're just very careful that there's no kind of contamination that's going to happen if they're building in that zone, because that's where the city's water comes from. You know. But anyway, this is the shoreline zoning map. So this is what Steve's talking about as an overlay zone. There's nothing here that affects other zoning in the city. This is just, we'll show you what the different shoreline zoning is in the city.
And it's all considered stream protection, which is 75 feet back from the normal water line until you can build a structure or disturb the soil. So if it were great ponds and lakes, then it's 100 feet back. So it's lesser of a restriction. And much of along the Caribou stream, and I think around Collins Pond, it's only 25 feet. So
what is it on the river?
it's only 75 feet, being that the river does not flow into a lake. So that's the trigger. If a river or stream flows into a lake, 100 feet.
So in the river, you can't disturb the soil, do construction within 75 feet
Right,
right now.
yeah.
So that's already an overlay,
Yeah.
extra requirement.
And in the southern part of it, headed back towards Presque Isle,
That's at 250 resource protection.
resource protection, then it's, and that's intended as a corridor for like the moose and deer and stuff to
Oh.
have a,
And topography wise, it's really steep there.
oh yeah, yeah.
But the city they could change that back to 75 feet if they wanted to.
Yeah,
Interesting.
What's the purple? Oh, purple is general development district.
Well, I would be interested to hear a little more where Dan to be able to
Right.
chime in, where he's certainly far.
Right, yeah, he's got a
More
better
involved.
handle on, you know, from looking at it from both perspectives.
Yeah, because they had done, most of the initial work was done back in 2019, 2020, before I even got on the board too, so I'm just remembering some of the discussions that they had, you know, and then obviously that DOT thing is kind of new within the last month, but I think it's going to affect what we end up doing down there, but.
it's a key factor.
Yeah, oh yeah,
That's-
definitely worthy of consideration.
Because if you have to maintain the rail line and the, you know, the setbacks and the rail line and all these other things in the corridor there, then I don't know how you could really do much with that property.
Yeah, no.
You know, they have a right of way through all that stuff.
And something that people don't always think about, when you have a right-of-way for a railroad, it's the same setbacks as you'd find from a street. So as you look along most of Limestone Street, if you have a 20-foot setback from Limestone Street and a 20-foot setback from the railroad right-of-way, they might even overlap. On the other side, from the railroad right-of-way to the setback of 75 feet from the river, they again might overlap, so.
So do we want to just propose that we forego this?
Table it
Yeah.
until we can,
I make a motion that we table it.
Second.
It was moved and second, we table further consideration of the land use table for the Renaissance Riverfront. Discussion.
I think that's the best for right now.
Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to table, Steve?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes, so the motion has
Who made the
been
motion?
tabled.
I
Made by
did.
Eric,
Okay, and second was
Steve.
Steve.
second by Steve, yes. So item C under new business is vacant buildings, parentheses, zombie
Zombie
buildings. Which makes it more trendy, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't know. Spicing up the planning board.
Yes.
Penny, do you have background on this topic?
Well, this was something that they're doing in Bangor, and some other municipalities are really going after this too. Some people, I think, have had it on the books, but now that it's become such a big problem, people are really trying to enforce it. By having a registration of vacant buildings and assessing fees, because I mean, just like it says here, vacant buildings are an impediment to neighborhood redevelopment and rehabilitation, decrease property values, and prevent neighborhood stabilization. These structures are unsightly, often structurally unsound or otherwise dangerous, attract criminal activity, and otherwise create a threat to public health, safety, and welfare of the neighboring properties and the general public. So as you know, there are more foreclosures, there are more people that are, I mean, I think Water Street is a good example of that. The folks that owned that were trying to give it back to the bank. They had lost all interest in the property. They stopped paying their payments, their taxes, their insurance. The bank had to put forced place insurance, which is very troubling considering there were families living in there with children. And so when there was a fire there, the owners were just like, well, it's not my problem, like I'm giving this to the bank. Well, the bank didn't take it. You know, the bank, you know, it was in foreclosure, but they hadn't taken actual ownership of the property. So in the end, their forced place coverage covered their exposure with the loan. And now we have a building down there that has 2 years of unpaid taxes. It's a burnt out mess. The people have now filed bankruptcy. And you know, you have buildings on both sides that are kind of in a holding pattern as to know what to do with their buildings, because they have this burnt out hole in the middle of them, that what happens there impacts what they're able to do with their property. And that was a case of an absentee landlord, and again, someone who, just like it says here, like these buildings are often the subject of foreclosure actions, and which take considerable time to resolve. And I can tell you from working here for the last 13 years in one day, that I think maybe the first day I worked here, at least the first week, I had someone come in and inquire about a vacant place at 24 Park Street, like, what's the status of that? Well, that property is still vacant, like, it's still in foreclosure, and it's now going before the council as a dangerous building, because there's, just like in the paragraph talked about there, it's structurally unsound, it's a harborage for animals, it's probably a harborage of unhoused people that are, you know, looking for a place to stay. It could be criminal activity going on there. I mean, we don't know all those things are going on at that one location, but I'm saying for 13 years, like, people have come in and inquired about a property that has literally been vacant that long. And I don't know if the bank has kind of written it off. I know that Ken, when he was working here, had conversations with the now mortgage holder, because the properties, the banks sell the loans to other banks, and then they group them in, you know, with other similarly situated properties and sell that off. And when Ken sent them a letter on that particular property and said, this may be going to the council as a dangerous building, and it may be torn down, and we're going to send you a bill, they said, hey, knock yourself out. And so, I mean, that's where we are today with some of these things. We actually have a property that was tax acquired in the latest round that had a USDA loan on it. And we actually had someone who was interested enough in the property, but USDA let it foreclose. And I said, I don't know if I would get involved with that, because there's still a USDA loan on the property. Well, I'm going to track it down. And sure enough, they did. And USDA says, yeah, we wrote that off years ago. That's a no value loan to us. And if you buy the property, we'll release our interest in it.
Really?
Yes. And so that's what we have
Part of
going
the
on.
problem.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is an issue where we have banks that also don't want to have any participation in maintaining our neighborhoods, because especially, and I know that one of us here at least is a banker, you know, works in the bank, but our problem is really the local banks.
No,
It's the far off banks, and because they don't care about what things look like on Park Street. They will even say when they call, like, they don't even know what an acre means. They're like, what is an acre? And why is it at this house? And how many acres does a person even need? And I'm like, thinking, acre. Oh, you mean that it has 2 acres? Yeah. What's this acre? So that would be the lot size.
How could someone, anyway?
Yeah,
Yeah, well-
but I'm just saying, like, it's an assault on rural culture. I think I might be editorializing, but
Well, what was the issue in Bangor? It was something like 80 or 90% of the vacant homes in Bangor were out-of-state
yes.
loan mortgage
Yeah.
companies. That was the issue.
Yeah.
So there was nobody in the state of Maine that they could go after
Right.
to facilitate action on those homes.
Correct.
Am I right?
Yep,
It was
yeah.
80, 90%, something like
It was a very
that.
high number.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what it is.
Yeah, it was
Very high
almost
number.
all of, like, say there was 400 blighted properties, it was like 378 of them or something like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that. There was an out-of-state
Yeah, the
entity
problem-
owned it.
Those, the larger corporation mortgage companies,
Yeah.
a small 1 acre property in Caribou, Maine that doesn't have any value.
Right. And our local banks are more apt to reach out to the people and say, okay, are you going to be able to follow through on this obligation?
Yeah.
If you're not, can't we just do a deed in lieu of foreclosure or
Right.
something, so that we're protecting the asset? And that's better for everyone, because again, like, it goes back to neighborhoods. It goes back to the value of other people's property that's in that neighborhood.
So did you get this document from Bangor?
I got this from Ken's packet, but
Okay,
I
so we're
think,
not-
I think that this was something that he may have found. If we scroll down, maybe it'll say
see.
something from.
Oh, yeah, Bangor Code, page 2,
Bangor
right at
Code.
the top.
There we
Okay.
go. Yeah. So I'm not really sure if the idea was for the planning board to look at it and see if their direction to staff was to kind of think about, is this something that, you know, we want to look at in Caribou as to try to avoid having these zombie properties. I don't know how easy this is going to be to enforce, because we run into this all the time, especially with land use violations. You know, you can pound your fists all you want and go in somebody's yard and stomp your feet and say, like, this, you need to cut your grass, you've got 4 junk cars here that are inoperable, you know, you've got to, you need to pick up your trash, I can see a raccoon from here. But at the end of the day, you know, you're limited. Like, am I going to go over there with a mower? No, I am not. Am I going to go over there, drive a wrecker and put, no, I am not. So you can try to appeal to people's better nature to fix these things, but a lot of it is just trying to get people to voluntarily comply with the different ordinances that we have. And how successful are we going to be with telling someone who is sitting in Manhattan that has no,
Right.
they don't care if you're ruining someone's neighborhood in Caribou, because
Well, it's a loan that they absorbed 3 banks in
Yes.
6 months,
Yeah.
and this is one of 2,000 properties they got. That's how, so,
Probably far more than
or
that.
I'm just throwing
Yeah.
a number, but you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we still have a property maintenance code?
We do. So the last edition that was adopted, I believe, was right before Austin left. So he would have left in 17. So it might have been the 15.
But if we were to actually enforce that and allow the code enforcement officer to take the violators in front of the judge, and then the judge fines the owners of these buildings, as that owner doesn't pay their fines, those fines accrue to the city, and once the fine is great enough, the city can take possession of the property, just like overdue library books, you know how.
or taxes, or anything. Yeah.
But, you know, special tax can be applied
That's
to it.
currently,
Yeah, we have a property maintenance code now that,
but it's never been implemented in that fashion you described?
The last one I remember was Sperry Street.
I used to use it.
Yeah, do you remember that? Yeah, that one actually went to court, but again, like, it
I
ended
forgot.
up being solved through voluntary compliance. At the end of the day, they decided, okay, the judge has told me I need to clean up my yard.
Yep.
And they did it. It wasn't that the city assessed all of these fines on the property.
I think it ended up with a $500 fine.
But the difference is you had a person in the room or in the town. I mean,
Right.
This is getting
That's right.
some unknown entity,
Mm-hmm.
states away.
Yeah.
So in the
Right.
Park Street example,
Mm-hmm.
that becomes vacant.
Mm-hmm.
We now, for 13 years, would have chased this person or
Right.
this company
That's right.
for fees,
Numerous, yeah.
and they would not pay them
That's
probably. And in the end, you'll be at a building that needs to be demolished, and they'll
Mhm.
say, yeah, send me the bill, I'll ignore that too.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. In
Yep.
most cases, when
So
we.
I don't know, this seems like a lot of effort, and I
Mhm.
don't think you're gonna get blood out of a stone. I don't
Mhm.
think you're gonna get any,
On
you're gonna
top of
get them to comply.
Are we billing for the time and the, it's not just, whoever is, how much time has been put into chasing person ABC down. I mean, for 13, if that's been 13 years,
Yeah.
there's,
That's the one
And
that
I'm-
I know of,
sure.
because it was literally the first week.
but that's an ungodly amount of hours
Yeah,
and cost on top of the,
yeah.
I
But I mean,
mean-
that's kind of what we do in government, is give people information on okay, that property is owned by X, the bank is Y.
yeah.
Here is their contact information, and then the
And
person will
that's-
come back and say, I called that bank and
Yeah.
they didn't get back to me or whatever. Because 13 years ago, the property was not as,
Sure.
not in as bad a condition, but
Yeah.
we have a very harsh climate.
Yeah.
and it deteriorates quickly. And so 13 years ago, if there would have been a mortgage holder or the owner say, yeah, let's make a deal, I'll sell you the property, and
Would have been more prone to happen.
exactly, but
Not now.
it doesn't seem, I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be a good solution to that.
So are we not using what the
Tool we
Property
have.
the tool that we
Maintenance
for a re?
I mean, we
reason?
send out, no, so I can just tell you, when I had to deal with notices of violation. So I kept a spreadsheet of, like, when I would send out letters, and then I would have their contact information, and so I'd send it out, and then I'd follow up, with a call, and, again, you're really looking for voluntary compliance. Like, you really don't want to deprive people of their property. I mean, this is America. You don't really want to be tying up the court system, who needs to be dealing with, more serious crimes than trash, garbage, that kind of thing. So, I mean, what I found when I had to do those things was the repetition. It was, me calling them, hey, the last time we talked, you said that, because a lot of times it was people that had moved downstate.
Yeah.
Not to blame everything on downstate, but I can remember a few cases that, well, we're going to come up like next weekend. So I would call and I would say, so, I drove by the property and I'm not seeing any change. Oh, well, the car wouldn't start. It was in the shop. Like, you hear all kinds of different excuses. But eventually you kind of wear them down, and I mean, they know it's me calling. I mean, everyone has caller ID today, so they know, oh, it's City of Caribou calling. It's that Penny the Pest. She's going to talk to me about that junk I've got in the yard. But eventually, you kind of wear them down, and then you get voluntary compliance. But sometimes you never do. And sometimes, I can remember actually in the neighborhood that you live in now, there was an issue that there was cars, like just inoperable vehicles in a yard, and we had probably 3 different neighbors that called us all of the time about these cars, and we would call, and I don't know that anything ever, really got done about it, except maybe they stopped taking my calls. But if you can document, I talked to this person on this day, and they have said that they're going to do that, then at least if you go to the city council and say, I want to take this to court, and here's why. Last summer, I
Document
chased
it.
this person.
Right.
Yes, I sent out letters once a month for 6 months. I followed that up with phone calls every 2 weeks. The person said on this date they were going to do this. If you have all that documented, and then you go to the council and you say, I think we've gotten to the point we have to go to court with this person. They're just obviously not going, voluntary compliance is not going to happen in this situation. Like Sperry, that's the one that I can remember, like it going to court and having a judgment, and that was one time where kind of the system worked. And
Well-
I mean, kind of. I mean, there was like a divorce in the middle of it and everything.
And that's what happens with a lot of these things. People get divorced, he goes this way, she goes that way, and they abandon their house.
Yep.
It just kind of, all of a sudden, the mortgage company ends up with an empty building because 2 people just called it quits.
Yeah.
And I think that's the story on Park Street,
Yeah.
if I remember right.
Well, he died. I'm not sure if they were divorced, but like he was a truck driver, and he
Yeah.
was killed like in a truck accident or something.
Is that what it was?
But I don't know if they were still married at that time. I don't remember. There's a story to every problem. Like every place you go in that looks terrible, there is a backstory to that, and they're all different. I mean, there are sometimes common threads, like Steve's saying, but I guess what's the first line to Anna Karenina? Like every happy family has the same story, but every miserable family has like their own story. That's, I don't know. It's been a long time since I read that book, but. it's,
So we have on the books or whatever, we have a tool where we can go after
Yeah, we also.
maintenance of properties.
Right, and we
This
also.
is somewhat a similar rendition of that problem
Mhm.
that's evolved with people now investing in rural properties.
And towns could invite the people that aren't taking care of their property, they could invite them to a council meeting and ask them to explain, our code officer has contacted you 3 times and you've ignored it. Are they going to ignore the council? And if they ignore the council, when you take that to court, the judge looks at that, code enforcement tried to work with them, the municipal governing body tried to work with them. The judge looks at that and they're guilty.
Yeah.
Because you
Certainly not cooperating.
you created a case, exhibit A, B, and C are your
Yeah.
notice of violations. But, that's kind of,
So is what I'm
potential.
hearing here that we need to kind of look at what other tools that we already have in our toolbox, like property maintenance code. We also have.
Yeah, let's make sure that we're using those that are already on the books.
Before going to.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of specificity in this.
I
Yeah.
think there's a
And-
lot of, this would consume,
This.
Yeah, I think
Right.
it's too much.
Maybe it works
and
for
my concern
there,
is,
Right.
I'm not sure it's going to be effective in the end, any more than,
Yeah.
what we have.
I don't see it as being effective at all, when I
So
when I
I
read
would-
through it.
I think it's interesting. I think when I read about it in the paper, it was interesting. Seeing the actual documents, interesting. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in Bangor or other communities that are dealing with this. And
We already have a dangerous building state ordinance, state code, which covers the whole process of identifying dangerous buildings all the way to tearing them down. The expense of tearing them down then is assessed as a special tax back against the property.
yeah,
We
So-
did that on Home Farm Road. That's a good example of that. The Belinsky house, we had to tear that down and we added it to their tax bill at the,
Oh, yeah.
it looked like a taco.
Yeah, it did.
The,
Whole roof caved
White-
in.
That was the one that the owner lived in California?
California.
Right.
Yeah. The problem is in the dangerous building actions I've been involved with since I've been here, the city ends up with the properties.
Yeah.
Because they weren't interested before, and when you just added another $10,000 or $15,000 to their property tax bill, they're certainly not interested now.
No.
not the
So-
incentive model.
But, I mean, the first one I was involved with was Birdseye. That's how the city ended up with Birdseye, was they had told the owner multiple times to deal with the dangerous structures that existed on that parcel. And he didn't, and they were mostly concerned about kids
Yeah.
getting in there. I don't know if you remember Bub's Carpentry building, that had burnt down, and they had suspected it was kids that had started that fire. So they were worried about, okay, well, that has burnt down. What's going to happen if maybe the same group decides they're going to go to Birdseye and start a fire there, and the things aren't as close there. So before they could be alerted that there was a fire. And so they said, if you're not going to tear them down, put a fence around them. So what happened was the city put up a fence and charged it to him and just never paid it. So that's how we ended up with that one. And the mattress and furniture place across from the airport, I don't know if you remember, that one had structural problems there too. And that's how the city ends up with these different things. So.
Well, while that's interesting and nice that Ken had provided it for us, I guess I would make a motion to use our existing before moving on to any new or suggested. That's a reasonable way to word it.
Yep.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to not add additional
Yeah.
programs to address this problem. Discussion. Seeing none. Want to vote, Steve?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Jane?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. So the motion passes. Thank you. And that ends new business. Old business says schedule comprehensive plan section workshop for June.
So I had in your stack, so when Karen came back from, she was away at a funeral. So, but she was there at when the Riverfront Committee met with the planning board. I was trying to find, we have like what we call a blight toolkit in here, but I can't seem to locate it. But that has a lot of tools for dealing with some of these zombie properties. So Karen came up with, now that Ken isn't working here any longer, she updated the list here about, you know, who the responsible staff would be for the ongoing comprehensive plan required sections, and who the person from the planning board would be, and so that's in there. It looks like, and I know that Gary met with Karen, and they said that 6/22 would be a good day to have that workshop, because we have to work around Thursdays on Sweden Street days because it's the summer. So we have, I guess we've been doing them like the 4th Thursday or something, which actually I think that is the 4th Thursday, because
Yep.
June 1st was a Thursday. But the 29th is a Thursdays on Sweden Street.
So going with June 22nd?
June 22nd, and it looks like Justin Staples is the planning board facilitator, and then Gary is the staff member that would be working on that. I will not be here that day, but I'll be coming back from a training, which doesn't get over in Orono till like 5 o'clock. So someone will have to take some notes. So Jay Cam, I actually met with Jay today, and so he's going to work with us. And of course, Karen has a background in planning also, and if we get our thoughts and the minutes from the meetings to Karen to kind of prep to get ready for Jay, I think that in the end we'll come out with a good work product to submit at the end.
So if there's no objection, we'll schedule for 6/22/23, June 22nd for the next section, which is recreation,
Is that,
led by Justin and Gary.
is that also a 6, sorry, is it listed?
I think they've had them at 6 p.m.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it says it. I don't know that it says it anywhere on.
No, I
To
didn't,
be
yeah.
honest with you,
No,
but
that's
I
fine.
think that's what they have typically done.
Okay.
Item 7 is staff report.
Not that anybody wants to hear me talk anymore, but I do have a few updates, which is we did get our Brownfields grant, and I think at the last meeting it was just kind of a twinkle in our eye, but it has now been confirmed. This will be to demolish the diesel plant and all of the small buildings that's down at the power plant site.
The
And-
diesel plant is the brick building?
Yes, it's
On
the brick building.
You drive right close to it when you.
Yes,
Right over
correct.
down in,
Yeah,
yeah.
like, you could put your hand out the window
Right,
and
yeah.
touch it, yeah, it's right there. And I mean, and that's, I think all of you have mentioned, that's some of the issue with the riverfront development, and that's what's gonna be hard about reuse at that site, is you've got a road, and we have to keep the road open because it goes to a boat landing. There's the railroad tracks, there's the river, there's a switching station, there's a dam. So even once we get all these buildings down, there's not a lot of land there to really do anything
Well, just-
with. But it'll be
just
cleaned
going
up.
from yes, old and decrepit to green space.
Yes, yeah.
And a better view of the
Yeah.
dam, or a better view
Mm.
of looking to the left down towards
Yeah.
the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a dramatic improvement for that
course.
area.
But I don't know that it can be developed into anything other
Probably
than a
not,
green
but-
space, but,
Green space, walking path. I mean,
yeah. But you can have, so we, through this brownfields journey, and honestly, as soon as I became the interim city manager, I actually started trying to get things together so we could apply for a brownfields grant. Like, I was like, this is something I've really wanted to try to push this agenda, but I didn't have any power to do that. But at least if you call people up and you say, yeah, I'm the interim city manager and I want to get this going, people will say, okay, it's just some like magic words there you can sprinkle in. So, but it took a year to get all of the different phase 1, phase 2, an inventory of, hazardous materials, to get all of that ready to submit a brownfields grant application. It was so much more intense than I really thought it would, that I could even imagine that it would be, honestly. But we're very thankful we have good partners. We have excellent people that own businesses in Caribou that are willing to take your call and say, yeah, I think it would cost this much to do that. Yeah, let me come take a look. I can give you some estimates for your application. And that was invaluable going through that process. NMDC gave us a lot of help too with just making sure that our application didn't get kicked out on some kind of technicality. The EPA also works with universities across the country in different regions. So in our region, it's the University of Connecticut. They have what they call a TAB program, which is Technical Assistance to Brownfields Communities. They also have a MAP program, which is Municipal Assistance Partnerships. So in this odyssey of brownfields, we have worked very closely with UConn. So they have engineering students that actually did like a little presentation about what we could do down there. And basically it would be like a park. Their idea too was, have some restrooms or something down there that people could enjoy it. Have a nice big parking lot. You could have food trucks down there. Have like a dog area, because every time I go down there to take pictures or look to see that the building's secure, there's always someone walking a dog. I don't think I have, even in the wintertime, because that road is open, people are walking their dogs down there. Having a place for that. Karen Gorman, she says, well, we also need to be thinking about like a mural to kind of hide where the Versant Power has their assets there too. So if someone's coming down to enjoy the river, they're not like looking at that. And they incorporated all of that. I'll see if I can find it in my email. And their assistance also has been just invaluable. I mean, I don't think that anybody can go through this process kind of, alone. You have to have an excellent team, and Caribou was very fortunate that they had an amazing team that worked on the application. And I will tell you that I was just unbelievably happy getting the call when they said, yep, we're giving you the money to do this, because there's no match. So we're getting $900,000. It's going to tear down the diesel plant, those little buildings, and then we are going to be starting actually right away to work on an application to tear down the steam plant. But so brownfields grants are a maximum of $2 million, and I have a feeling it would be $2 million at least to tear that down.
Does the city own the land out to where the boat landing is?
No, the state actually owns a lot of that.
Oh.
The city just owns a small part there, that was acquired. So this that you're seeing, this was all done by the TAB program. This was students that worked on that last year with, what they could do for reuse. So this is kind of what they came up with. You know, it would look like from above, you know, having some vegetation and trees, different plantings. And you can see where there's a parking lot. This would be assuming that we were fortunate enough to have everything torn down. And their idea was to have some raised beds. People could go down there and plant like little gardens. In the park area, here's the little dog park. So this would be what the parking lot, there's picnic tables. Dana and I actually drove into Fort Fairfield this week, and of course their Riverside Park, they have a nice, that's a very nice setup there. They have great covered picnic tables and a building there that people can use too. So this is kind of what they came up with to kind of reuse that space down there if we can get everything torn down. And this was free to the city. It's through, like I said, the EPA Brownfields program that they have all this taxpayer assistance. Right now, we are trying to get feedback from the community on, you know, what they would like to see down there, what would be most important. Is it more important to have picnic tables? Is it more important to have like the dog park or, you know, the raised beds? You know, how important is it to have a gathering space like this shows with the food trucks and stuff? And that's important to the overall EPA, you know, when they're evaluating, like, how well did we do on our first brownfields project? If we have a proven track record, then we would be more likely to be able to get more funding in the future. So Karen and I are going to the National Brownfields Conference in Detroit in August. And then they have an all-Maine brownfields grant meeting. It's going to be in Biddeford in September, so we'll be going to that too. So I also met today with Jared, who works for DOT, that we're working with the DOT on a village partnership initiative to try to help with our gateways, just trying to make things more inviting for pedestrians, so that, of course, we have nice walking paths around the mill pond, but, you know, how do we get people to take advantage of that, or walk around the pond and maybe walk down to Water Street and down to the river? We would also like to have it so that, like, if kids want to walk between the high school and the middle school, that they're able to do that safely, that there's consistent sidewalks and things for them to be able to do. So he's working with us on that. He was actually in town because Presque Isle is actually having their kickoff meeting for they're doing the same thing over there. They have a traffic study and things going on over there. So that's something that we're working on too. I don't know if it's necessarily, you know, something with the planning board, but just the different projects that we're working on. Again, we have two public hearings for dangerous buildings at the next city council meeting, which is June 26th, and that's the 24 Park Street and Water Street. Other people keep saying to me, is that really a dangerous building? When there's not a building, but it's a dangerous property for sure. We need to figure out what we're doing, because our inaction is not helping the neighboring properties there either. And I don't know if anybody has any questions about anything. I wasn't really sure what to talk about. The LD 2003, which I believe the planning board has talked a lot about, which is, you know, about the multifamily dwellings. And then now there's this LD 1706 or something. And there were 3 different possible amendments that came out of committee. One is don't do anything and everyone has to comply July 1st. I don't know that that's really practical. The one that seems to be the most popular, which was Amendment C, I think, was will give cities with a council form of government until the end of the year, but towns that have town meeting have until July 1 of 2024. It's not really equitable, but, and then Amendment B was for everyone to have until July 1 of 2024. Caribou, like a lot of communities, has not tried to tackle what this is going to mean in our ordinance, because we were taking a wait and see approach, because there were so many different competing pieces of legislation in Augusta. So we weren't sure really how it was all going to play out, but there's a lot of communities that were kind of doing just a wait and see approach. I actually emailed Representative Jarrett and Senator Jackson actually twice this week. Once, just about, what a hardship this is in communities when they throw these things at us that they don't really, it doesn't even make sense. I mean, this is stuff that we turn people down for building permits now, trying to have another dwelling unit that they're putting in their, their property. And then I wrote to them again when they had the different amendments that came out of committee to say, make it equitable and have it the same for everyone, so that if you're a council form of government or a town meeting, that we all have the same date for adoption. But I think it's going to be that we'll have to have something in place by January 1. So spoiler alert, like that's going to end up kind of throwing itself to the front of the line, because we'll have to have something in place for that. It's just something all the time.
I think it's like we need to convert R1 to make it part of R2, and it seems to be the simplest way to be in compliant with what the state's mandating.
Yeah. So even after they decide what they're doing, I mean, the Department of Economic and Community Development will still need at least 90 days to kind of look everything over to make some kind of recommendations to towns. MMA will weigh in on it. So. I'd like to say it's going to be fun, but I would be lying.
Okay, thank you. And Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Moved and second that we adjourn. All those in favor, Steve?
Yes.
And Eric?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and I vote as well. And we adjourned at 7:45.
Thank you.
Do you still have a problem with the person with the cars that still live there?
I'm not actually sure who.
Well, the state, the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, they have people that go around, and if you have more than, I think it's 5 unregistered vehicles on your